So today I want to talk about a country that almost nobody is discussing in the context of this war. Everyone is talking about America. Everyone is talking about Iran. Everyone is talking about Israel and China and Saudi Arabia. But there is one country sitting quietly on the sidelines of this war, watching everything very carefully, that I believe will emerge as the single biggest surprise winner when this is all over. And that country is Japan. Now, I know what you are thinking. Japan. Really? A country with the oldest population in the world. A country that has been stuck in a deflationary economic spiral for 30 years. A country that imports almost everything it needs to survive. A country that could be blockaded and starved if China ever takes Taiwan. That Japan. That is going to be the surprise winner of this war. Yes. And by the end of this video, I think you will understand exactly why. But first, let me be completely honest with you about Japan's weaknesses, because I want you to understand just how bad things look on the surface. Before I show you why the surface tells completely the wrong story. Part 1, Japan's weaknesses, and they are real. So let us start with the uncomfortable truth about Japan. Japan has serious structural problems, and I am not going to pretend otherwise. The first problem is demographic. Japan has the oldest population in the world. The oldest. Not one of the oldest. The oldest. More than 28% of Japan's population is over 65 years old. And that number is getting worse every year. An aging population means fewer workers, less productivity, less innovation, less economic dynamism, and a growing burden of elderly care that younger generations have to carry. That is a massive constraint on Japan's future growth potential. The second problem is economic. For the past 30 years, Japan has been stuck in what economists call a deflationary spiral. Prices falling, wages stagnant, debt accumulating, growth barely moving. Japan has an excessive debt burden that has kept its economy in a kind of permanent slow motion for 3 decades. While China was growing at 8 and 9 and 10% per year, Japan was growing at 1%. That is a devastating economic disadvantage. The third problem is resource dependence. Japan is a small island nation. It has almost no natural resources of its own. No significant oil, no significant gas, no significant agricultural land relative to its enormous population. It needs to import almost everything to keep its economy running and its people fed. And this resource dependence creates a fourth and potentially existential problem. Japan gets approximately 75% of its energy from the GCC, from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the UAE, and that energy travels by ship through the Strait of Malacca. Now, here is the problem. Taiwan sits at a critical point along that route. If China ever reunifies with Taiwan, and China has made very clear that reunification is its ultimate goal, then China effectively controls Japan's energy lifeline. China could blockade Japan, could starve Japan of the energy it needs to function, could bring Japan's entire economy to its knees without firing a single shot. So when you look at Japan on paper, what do you see? Oldest population in the world, 30 years of economic stagnation, no natural resources, completely dependent on imported energy, vulnerable to Chinese blockade. That is a nation that looks like it is in serious trouble. And yet, I would invest every single dollar of $1 billion in Japan. Not half in China and half in Japan. All of it in Japan. And I want to explain exactly why. Part 2, what history actually tells us about Japan. So here is where I need you to stop thinking like an economist and start thinking like a historian. Because economists look at data. They look at debt ratios and demographic curves and GDP growth rates. And all of that data says Japan is in trouble. But historians look at patterns. They look at what people have done when their backs were against the wall, when everything looked hopeless, when the odds were completely against them. And when you look at Japan through the lens of history, you see something completely different from what the economic data shows you. Let me take you through 3 moments in Japanese history that I think are the most important things you need to understand about this country. Moment 1, the Mongol invasions. So go back with me to the 13th century. The year is 1274, and the most powerful military force the world has ever seen is preparing to invade Japan, the Mongol Empire. At this point, the Mongols have already conquered China. They have conquered Central Asia. They have conquered Persia. They have conquered Russia. They have crushed every army that has ever stood against them. There is no nation on earth that has successfully resisted a full-scale Mongol invasion. None. And Japan at this time is a small feudal nation, divided into different clans and fiefs, fighting among themselves constantly, with no unified national army, no central command, no experience fighting a military force of this scale and sophistication. On paper, Japan has absolutely no chance that the Mongols invade. And something extraordinary happens. The Japanese fight back with everything they have, with a ferocity and a unity that nobody expected from a nation so divided. And then a massive typhoon strikes the Mongol fleet. The Japanese called it the kamikaze, the divine wind, and the Mongol invasion fails. But here is the part that most people do not know. The Mongols came back. 7 years later, in 1281, they came back with an even larger force, the largest naval invasion force the world had ever seen at that point. And again, the Japanese fought back with the same ferocity, the same unity, the same absolute refusal to accept defeat. And again, another typhoon destroyed the Mongol fleet twice. Japan defeated the greatest military empire in the world twice, as a feudal divided nation with no unified army. That tells you something very important about the Japanese people. When they face an existential threat, when their survival as a nation is at stake, they come together, they unify, they fight with everything they have, and they find a way to survive. Moment 2, the Meiji Restoration. Now go forward with me to the middle of the 19th century. The year is around 1850, and the Western industrial powers, Britain, France, America, are carving up Asia. They carved up China, they colonized India, they took Southeast Asia. They were colonizing the entire continent. And Japan, still a feudal nation, still using samurai swords, still largely cut off from the outside world, was next. Everyone expected Japan to be colonized. It seemed inevitable. A backward feudal nation against the full industrial and military might of the Western powers. There was no realistic scenario in which Japan survived as an independent nation. But then something happened that shocked the entire world. Japan looked at what was happening around it. It looked at how China was being destroyed. It looked at what colonization meant. And it made a decision, a collective national decision. We are going to change everything. We are going to take everything that made the West powerful, its technology, its industrial methods, its military organization, its scientific knowledge, and we are going to master it. We are going to transform ourselves completely in a generation. And that is exactly what they did. In 20 to 30 years, a single generation, Japan went from a feudal backward nation using samurai swords to an industrial power with a modern navy, a modern army, modern factories, modern universities. And then in 1905, Japan did something that stunned the entire world. It defeated Russia, the Russian Empire, a European great power, in open military conflict. The first time in modern history that an Asian nation had defeated a European great power. Think about what that means. In one generation, Japan went from feudal isolation to defeating a European empire. That is not just resilience. That is something almost unprecedented in human history. Moment 3, the recovery after World War II. And now the most extraordinary example of all, August 1945. Japan has just been through the most devastating military defeat in its history. 2 atomic bombs dropped on its cities, firebombing campaigns that destroyed most of its major urban centers. Its navy completely destroyed. Its army completely defeated. Its economy completely shattered. Its cities reduced to rubble by any measure, any historical measure. Japan in 1945 was finished. Not struggling, not damaged, finished. There was no realistic scenario in which Japan recovered from that level of destruction in any meaningful time frame. And yet, in 20 years, one generation, Japan became the world's greatest manufacturing power. The world's greatest, not one of the greatest. The greatest from complete devastation to global manufacturing dominance in 20 years. How? Not through luck, not through natural resources. Japan has almost none. Not through favorable geography. Japan is a small island with limited land. Through the sheer collective will, intelligence, discipline, and creativity of the Japanese people. There is something in Japanese culture, something deeply embedded in how they see themselves, how they relate to each other, how they respond to adversity, that produces this extraordinary capacity for recovery and transformation. And that is what I want you to hold in your mind as we talk about what is happening right now. Part 3, why Japan is the surprise winner of this war. So now let us connect all of this to the current war and explain why I believe Japan will emerge as the surprise winner. This war is accelerating 3 massive global trends: deindustrialization, remilitarization, and mercantilism. And each of these 3 trends, which look like threats to Japan on the surface, actually create opportunities for Japan that no other nation is as well positioned to exploit. Let me explain each one. Opportunity 1, remilitarization. So for the past 80 years, Japan has been constitutionally prohibited from maintaining offensive military forces. It has a self-defense force, but no army, no offensive navy, no power projection capability. It has depended entirely on American military protection for its security. But now, as this war exposes the limitations of American military power, Japan is being forced to rethink everything. And Japan's response to that challenge, given what history tells us about this country, is going to be extraordinary. Japan is already talking about the most significant military expansion in its post-World War II history. Defense budget doubling, new missile capabilities, new strategic partnerships, new military technology. Japan is already developing hypersonic missiles, advanced drone swarms, next-generation submarine technology, AI-powered defense systems. This is not a nation slowly waking up to a new military reality. This is a nation that when it decides to move, moves with extraordinary speed and precision. Remember what happened during the major restoration. Japan looked at what the West had built, its industrial technology, its military organization, and mastered it in 1 generation. Japan will do exactly the same thing now with modern military technology. It will study, it will learn, it will adapt, and it will build something extraordinary. Something that reflects Japanese ingenuity and precision. Something that nobody else has built before. Opportunity 2, mercantilism. So this war is breaking down global free trade and forcing nations to build their own independent supply chains. And on the surface, this looks catastrophic for Japan, a resource-poor island nation that depends entirely on global trade to survive. But here's what most people miss. Japan has been preparing for exactly this scenario for decades. Japan learned from its experience in World War II when American naval power cut off its resource supply lines and brought its economy to its knees, that depending on foreign supply chains, an existential vulnerability. And it has been quietly building resilience against that vulnerability ever since. Japan uses approximately half the energy per unit of economic output compared to China. Half. It has built some of the world's most advanced energy storage technology. Its manufacturing processes are the most resource efficient on Earth. In a world where energy is expensive and scarce, that efficiency is not just an advantage. It is a superpower. And here is a deeper point. Japan is an outward-looking seafaring nation. That outward-looking mentality, that constant searching for resources and opportunities beyond its own borders, is exactly what mercantilism rewards. Nations that know how to engage with the world and extract value from it will thrive in a mercantilist world. And Japan has been doing exactly that for centuries. It is not learning a new skill. It is returning to its deepest national instinct. Opportunity 3, the China-Japan dynamic, and now the most important and most subtle opportunity of all. Most people assume that a rising China is an existential threat to Japan. And on one level, that is true. China's control of Taiwan would give it leverage over Japan's energy supply lines. China's growing military power does represent a genuine security challenge for Japan. But here's what most analysts completely miss. China and Japan, despite their enormous historical tensions, actually have fundamentally different mentalities that could allow them to coexist. China sees itself as the middle kingdom, the center of the universe, a self-sufficient nation that has no real interest in or need for the outside world. China's historical instinct is to turn inward, to focus on maintaining its own sovereignty and stability, to avoid foreign entanglements. Japan is the complete opposite. Japan is an outward-looking seafaring nation, an island nation that has always had to reach out to the world to survive, always trading, always exploring, always engaging with the outside world. China wants to be left alone to develop in its own way. Japan needs to engage with the world to survive. China turns inward. Japan turns outward. These are not competing strategies. They are complementary ones. Two nations facing completely different directions. One looking inward at itself, one looking outward at the world, do not necessarily collide. And we are already seeing signs of this coexistence in practice. Despite enormous historical tensions, despite territorial disputes in the East China Sea, China and Japan continue to trade hundreds of billions of dollars with each other every year. Their economies are deeply intertwined. Their people travel between the two countries in enormous numbers. The relationship is complicated, but it is not and does not have to become a war. Part 4, the billion-dollar question. So let me bring this all together with the question I started with. If someone gave me $1 billion and said, invested in East Asia, China, or Japan, where would I put it? I would put every single dollar in Japan. Not because Japan does not have serious problems. It does. Not because the path ahead for Japan is easy. It is not. But because of what history consistently and repeatedly tells us about the Japanese people. Every single time Japan has faced an existential crisis, the Mongol invasions, the threat of Western colonization, the devastation of World War II, it has responded with extraordinary collective resilience, creativity, and transformation. Not gradually, not slowly, but with breathtaking speed and thoroughness. And right now, Japan faces another existential crisis. American protection is becoming unreliable. China is growing more powerful. Energy supply lines are under threat. The global economy is fragmenting. These are exactly the conditions that historically bring out the best in Japan, not the worst, the best. Because when Japan faces a wall, it does not collapse against it. It finds a way over it, under it, through it, in ways that surprise everyone who is watching. China looks powerful right now. Its economy is enormous. Its military is growing. Its global influence is expanding. But China's strength is built on a model, cheap energy in, manufactured goods out, that this war is destroying. And China's response to crisis historically has been to turn inward, to become more insular, more conservative, more defensive. Japan's response to crisis historically has been to transform, to innovate, to emerge from the crisis stronger and more capable than it entered it. That is why I would invest all my money in Japan. Not because of where Japan is today, but because of where Japan will be in 10 to 20 years after it has done what it always does when its back is against the wall. So let us just recap what we covered today. Japan has serious structural weaknesses. Oldest population in the world, 30 years of economic stagnation, no natural resources, dependent on imported energy, vulnerable to Chinese blockade. All of that is real, but history tells a completely different story about Japan. The Mongols invaded twice, the greatest military empire in the world, and Japan defeated them both times as a feudal divided nation. The Western powers threatened to colonize Japan, and Japan responded with the Meiji Restoration, transforming from feudal backwardness to an industrial power that defeated Russia in a single generation. America devastated Japan with nuclear bombs and firebombing, and Japan recovered to become the world's greatest manufacturing power in 20 years. And now Japan faces another existential crisis. Unreliable American protection, growing Chinese power, fragmented global trade. And based on everything history tells us about this extraordinary nation, Japan will respond the way it always responds, with resilience, with transformation, with breathtaking speed. And it will emerge from this crisis stronger than anyone watching right now expects. That is why Japan is the surprise winner of this war. Not because it looks strong today, but because of what it always becomes when things look their darkest. Subscribe for more analysis of this conflict and its global consequences explained in simple English. And tell me in the comments, do you agree that Japan will be the surprise winner of this war? Or do you think another country will emerge stronger from all of this? I will see you next time.